Hello there.
Hey, this is Mike.
This is Mike. Yes.
What's up, Mike? How you doing, man?
Hey, not much. Not much. Or not bad, I guess. So, not much going on. Just kind of enjoying a nice Saturday evening, relaxing, chilling. So yeah, how you doing?
I'm doing all right. I'm in Georgia, just outside of
Okay.
Atlanta, and it snowed a lot today. So dealing with that.
Yeah, I am. Sorry, I just got little feedback there. I had your stream open on my phone. I called in, so suddenly was hearing myself like with a 30-second delay there, and I was like, "Whoa, what in the world?" But yeah, we're up here in Ohio, so yeah, it's been really warm this winter though, so not a lot of snow or anything. Just got like an inch, this past weekend, but nothing much, nothing crazy. So,
Yeah,
but yeah,
you get snow up there a good bit. I'm from New York, and it's really
yeah.
odd because I remember living through I think it was Blizzard Felix, and it was huge. Like that, the snow was I don't know, 20 feet high. Like it covered our entire
Oh man,
house.
yeah.
And here, there's 2 inches of snow. Everybody calls out of work. All of the banks were
Everybody
closed.
freaks out.
Yes,
Yeah.
all the grocery stores are closed. Schools are closed. Like everything is closed all of a sudden just because there's a little bit of snow. It drives me crazy.
Yeah, around where I'm at, we usually get at a time, maybe at most like 4 inches or something like that. We're in the southern part of the state, so we're not up by the lake or anything like that. So we don't get any of the crazy lake effect stuff or anything like that. But yeah, we're usually pretty sane about it. If it's just a dusting or something like that, we don't freak out. But yeah, it's I remember hearing the news a couple years ago about down in Atlanta how everybody was freaking out with the ice and everything that hit. It was like the apocalypse or something like that happened, and we all up
Yes.
here kind of had a good chuckle about it.
You said it was a couple of years ago?
Yeah, I think so.
Yep. Yeah.
Or
Yes,
yeah,
it was
I don't
talked
remember the
about
year exactly, but
everywhere. Yeah, it was like
yeah.
national news. It was all over the place because some schools closed down before the day even started, and other schools were like, we'll be all right. And then kids were stranded at schools because it just
Oh, that's
flash
crazy.
froze everywhere. There were cars stranded everywhere. They called it snowpocalypse or something,
Oh yeah,
snowmageddon.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it
They
was
love
crazy.
to they love to pile on those crazy hype terms or whatever because it gets attention.
Yeah, yes, they do. So, I think some other people might be calling in a little bit later. I'm not sure. My friend Kat said that she wanted to call in as well, but I know that she's got some stuff planned tonight, so maybe
Yeah, I
she
probably can't
won't.
stay for too long. I'm gonna have to go help my kids get into bed here soon-ish, but or before too long. But yeah, I can chat for a little bit.
That's cool. I so give me a rundown. You are in AnCap, which stands for Anarcho-Capitalist.
That's
Um,
correct. Yes.
just so you understand, for where I'm coming from, I'm conservative. Just about every meaning of the word, socially, fiscally. Like I am, I'm very conservative in my beliefs, but I'm not normally when you're very conservative, you're pretty far right, and I'm not. I'm almost as center as you can get, which is odd. But so give me a rundown. What does it mean to be an anarcho-capitalist?
So, in the historical sense of the term, it would go back to Murray Rothbard,
Okay.
and Murray Rothbard is like the libertarian guy, and his idea, at least, of government was that, well, he boiled it down to a principle called the non-aggression principle, which was that in society, nobody is to initiate force or aggression against anybody else. To do that would be criminal. And so, the only time you would ever use any sort of force or aggression should be, in response to somebody else using force or aggression. So defensive violence, or even in the sense, even in there was a case of somebody having committed some sort of assault or murder or something like that, you could use some sort of punitive violence, which is, I think that's a pretty, if you just leave it at that, that's a pretty widely understood principle. I think most people would agree with that. Where we start to get into some uniqueness with the anarcho-capitalist position is that we are very consistent at trying to actually apply that principle even to government itself. So it's a very historical idea that, the government isn't above the law. And I think, even, conservatives, you would generally agree with us on that, for the most part, that, government isn't above the law. But then, the question becomes, what does that mean? And so the anarcho-capitalist view would be that, taxation is theft. And, enforcing a monopoly on the provision of the service of government is actually an act of aggression. So having a government be constituted as what we call a state, which would be like what we have here in America, or pretty much any time there's been government in the history of the world, you have one central government that's in charge of all of society, and everything flows from that. And all authority basically is bound up under that. And there's not really anybody in your area or whatever in your society who is a check or a counter to that. They are basically the monopoly provider for, law, for police, for, those kinds of things. So we would say, that presents a conflict of interest. So if anytime there's a criminal case or something like that, or even just like a civil case of, hey, the government violated my rights, the government gets to act as the arbiter in the dispute that it's a party to, which is a conflict of interest. And surprise, surprise, they tend to rule in their own favor a lot. And so we would say that is inherently a problem for good governance. It creates perverse incentives. Democracy itself creates perverse incentives, and there's opportunities for abuse there that are not properly checked. And so a better way of doing government would be to have government services provided by for-profit companies on a marketplace. So you would have, there's actually not that dissimilarity between what we have now and what we would have then, except that, like the courts, they wouldn't just be the government courts. You'd have, a market of court companies. You wouldn't just have the one police force. You would have, a market of police forces, security forces. It could be all different kinds. You'd have like investigative, like for detectives. You have like private investigators, except they wouldn't have to work for the police department or anything like that, or a law firm or whatever. But then you could have like different law firms that would have their own, set of lawyers and maybe some of that, and they would all sort of compete with each other for business. And they would also have to sort of work together. So they would have
So real quick.
Yeah, sorry, I don't want to get too detailed on that. Go ahead.
It's okay. So let's break it down real quick. We've got anarchism and capitalism kind of mixed into one. Now, are anarchists not normally capitalists?
Well, so that's the rub, and that's the reason why there's a number of reasons why I don't like the term anarchist. One of them is that typically the term anarchist, at least in American society and in the common understanding of it, has more of a sort of an anarcho-communist idea, which would be like, there shouldn't be any rules in society. There shouldn't be any limits. There shouldn't be any, and nobody should be allowed to enforce any sort of boundaries on me. So they particularly would reject the idea of private property or of any sort of hierarchical authority in any sense at all. And so we believe, as capitalists, we believe in the main idea, behind the idea of capitalism is that we believe heavily in the idea of private property. Right. We believe that is it's just inherent in the right of being a person. You own yourself. You own, in terms of your own body. You own your own body, right. And then everything that flows from that, with what you do with your liberty and your body and everything, the things that you produce, you own, and so that you have property. out of that. But then, you know, the communist or the general anarchist idea would be, no, I should be able to do whatever I want. There shouldn't be any policing. There shouldn't be any authority in society. And we actually reject that idea. And that's probably one of the things I try to emphasize.
You there? Hello? Mike? I think I lost you, Mike. Hello? All right, we'll get Mike back on in just a second. We've got some sound from something. What is this sound? Hello?
Hey, Eichmann, your speaker started talking.
Yeah, I lost him.
Technical difficulties. One sec.
No problem, man. Take your time. Do what you gotta do.
Oh, how do I get out of this? All right, can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, so sorry about that. I don't know where I left you off or whatever. I have this Bluetooth headset that I was listening to music on earlier, and I tried to disconnect it for the call, and I guess it got switched over or something.
So
I'm sorry about that. You heard my kids or whatever.
Yeah,
Right.
I heard some music, but yeah. So for anarchists, normally, like the ones that I've spoken to, normally they do. It does seem like they don't want almost anything in government. Like everything
Right.
that I talk about in government, any sort of oversight, any sort of rule over their life, they seem to be against all of that. And so when I start to like really, it sounds nice in theory, but then when I start to really think about it, I'm like, yo, but like you believe in personal property, you think that like your private life is very important to you. Who is it that's supposed to enforce these rules of your private life? Like who's supposed to make sure that your private property stays your property if we're like taking away the responsibility of cops or of courts and things like that? And so you're saying you don't believe that?
Right. Yeah. I try to emphasize that, you know, I'm not against authority. God's word says, Romans 13, all authority comes from God. And there is a law that God has given mankind. I would look to Genesis 9 as the starting point for that. If man sheds man's blood, by man his blood will be shed. There's this principle here that if you violate the rights of another person, then you have done wrong, that there should be some sort of retributive justice for, and defensive violence against that sort of an invasion, it should be justified. So, yeah, I totally reject the idea that there's no authority or no rule or anything in society. There's definitely a need for that. And we know that the need for that comes from the reality of human sin, and human sin is not going to go away. There's a lot of people who would even consider themselves Rothbardian, who sort of have this idea that, if we just have the right ideas about how society should work, then we'll have this utopia. And I think they're wrong. I think there's always going to be conflict in society, and conflict comes primarily from human sin. And so you're always going to have somebody to wield the sword in society. I just don't believe that should have to be, that has to be a monopoly. I don't think that there has to be a state that is the one organization who gets to make all the laws and then enforce all the laws and then decide whether, if you have a disagreement with them, that they're right, or whatever. And if one of their officers does something wrong, they investigate themselves and find themselves to do no wrong, and there's just no recourse against that. my preference for, an anarcho, which is technically there's no state government, there's no one final human and overarching authority, but there is government. It's provided through capitalism, and my preference for that tends to be a little more pragmatic, honestly, but also principled from the standpoint of I don't want even the government to go out there and say, oh well, even though you didn't voluntarily subscribe to me being your government, I'm going to make you, and I'm going to enforce taxation on you, and I'm going to say, now you owe me taxes because I say so, even if you would rather go somewhere else with your money and get better service. I think it would be better if there was the ability to do that. If I don't like what I'm seeing on Netflix, I can cancel and go get like Disney Plus or something like that. I should be able to do that. If the police department is doing a bad job, I should be able to say, well, I'm going to support this other police department that's doing a better job. And that's kind of the idea of what I want to see in society.
So is there like a country right now where anarcho-capitalism is anywhere close to what I guess you guys are looking for?
There really isn't, and there really never has been, unfortunately. It's just a reality of life, and it's a common objection. It's never been tried, or it's impossible to actually implement, and those are valid arguments. I think to an extent. I'm one who says we are in a situation that we're in, partly because the people who have always sought power have been very good at gaining that power and gaining it through convincing people that they need to be in power. And as long as people believe that there needs to be this ruling class in power, then there's always going to be that. And unfortunately, the people who have a vested interest in being that ruling power have a vested interest in convincing people that they are, and it's really actually not that hard to do, unfortunately. So it's just never come about that there's been an AnCap society. Is it possible that we would ever get there? I don't think so, to be honest. Because again, I think I just think the problem with depravity is what it is, and so you're always going to have those power seekers, and you're always going to have people who are more interested in living their lives instead of being too involved into politics necessarily to really pay attention enough to know what's actually going on, and so they're just going to believe what they're told. On the media or whatever. And I don't think this is anybody's fault necessarily. I think most of us, we have families to take care of, we have jobs to do and everything. And the weight and the burden of actually studying things and paying enough attention to really know, what people are actually doing behind the scenes, it's really hard to do, especially when the media is owned, or not owned, but, really like so bad. They're just so bad, the media is, and they don't really report the important stuff anymore. And so it's really hard to follow along. And so as long as that's the reality of it, it's very difficult to foresee that ever coming about in the real world, unfortunately.
Yeah. I mean, that would be my main issue, I guess, is if I'm considering this, I'd look at it kind of like I do with socialism, where I'm like, well, this doesn't seem to have ever worked anywhere else. So what makes you think that anyone's going to buy into this,
Yeah. Well, and one thing I would say in response to that is, unlike socialism that actually has been tried and failed, anarcho-capitalism actually hasn't been tried. So right. I would say, let's give it a try. We don't know if it would fail. Once it was implemented, who knows? Maybe somebody would come up to take power. But, in our theory, at least in theory, if we did implement, we were able to implement an AnCap society, if any one of the governments tried to become the overlord over all the others, we would say, what's the likelihood that would actually be able to happen? Like, first of all, they'd have to wage some sort of war against the others, which would be very expensive. And if you don't have the ability just to tax people and conscript people, it's going to be very logistically difficult to pull off. Plus, the other companies aren't going to like it, and so they're not going to allow that. They're going to stand up and oppose them, and they might even band together to stop them. And maybe, who knows what would happen in that situation? I don't know, but hopefully it would be enough of a deterrent that it wouldn't be tried, but we don't really know. So I would say that, and then I would also say, I forgot my other point. Yeah, you were saying socialism hasn't been tried. I just lost my train of thought. I was going to say something else, but
I got another question for you. So, my main thing when I talk to progressives is normally that, like, they have this very utilitarian kind of idea where we just want the least amount of suffering in the world. We, that's their main thing. And I admire that. That's great. Like, that's cool. Good for you. If I wasn't a Christian, I'd probably believe the same thing. But because I am a Christian, I do believe that there are rights that everybody has to their own property, that they have private rights that are very important, and that the government should not be able to, I guess the government shouldn't be able to do anything about that. I don't care if I'm in the United States, if I'm in Afghanistan, if I'm on a desert island. I have the same rights no matter where I go, because these are not given to me by the government. These are given to me by God. And so therefore, the government cannot give me rights. They can only recognize my rights. And when it comes to something like, welfare, or healthcare for all, like that, I have issues with that, because you're taking away options and now saying everything has to be just one thing, and the government's going to run it. And will it help the United States, I guess in the short term? Sure. But you're taking away people's rights, and you're making it to where they have less options and less property and less decisions to make. And so I think with anarcho-capitalism, you kind of take that exact idea and you just spread it to everything. Like it goes to literally everything.
Yeah, and we have a lot of criticisms of modern society. I mean, we look at what the government that we have now and the encroachments and everything, and we say, this is democracy demonstrating that it's a failure. Theoretically, democratic republic, the United States was supposed to prevent this kind of thing from happening, but here we are. And we see the gradual encroachment. And we see, you can even look in the Constitution, just the very idea of eminent domain, the idea that people really didn't own property in this country. It was the government all along considers itself to be the owner of everything in this country. And it was just allowing us to have ownership of it. And so it was only really a matter of time before this kind of a thing came about. And so it's unfortunate to see. And so our take is, the only way to ensure that the government is truly restrained to within, the boundaries of where, we would believe that it should be. And I think you and I would agree that, even if we had a monopoly government, a good government would be one, like you said, that recognizes our rights and upholds those rights. And so, I would say in biblical terminology, in Romans 13, this would be, the one who is not a terror to good conduct, but is a terror to bad conduct. So he punishes the wrongdoer for doing his wrong, and then rewards the good, or at least praises the good, by not, using the sword against him or whatever. So, we would have life, liberty, and property, and the government would protect those. And so you would enforce crimes like, murder is illegal, rape, theft, etc., things like that. And then that would pretty much be all it does. But of course they don't stop there. They have these utilitarian ideas, and they want to advance and make society better or whatever. And we would say our take on that is, in an anarcho-capitalist society, they wouldn't be able to get away with doing that, because they have to have paying customers, and nobody's going to pay them voluntarily to go do these things. They have to subjugate people and force people to pay taxes in order to, and then brainwash them through public schooling and all this stuff to get them to this idea to where, we need government to do all this stuff for us. If it's just okay, you can hire the government that you want that's going to protect you the best or whatever, then you're going to hire the one that actually upholds and protects your rights, and not the one that takes it away. And so if any government starts rising up and trying to take people's rights away, then they would suddenly lose all their subscribers, and they would go out of business. And so that, we think that's a natural check on what would happen. And so, again, the reality of human sin is what it is. Things would never go perfectly. So I don't know if it would actually be sustainable. I don't know how long it would be sustainable, but we would hope at least it would be more sustainable than what we have. I don't know.
So let's try to go through some of this like one by one. What would we do with voting? Okay, so let's say right now we have Congress. They want to pass a law. How does this work if we have two Congresses at the same time?
Well, Congress would be more like, the board of directors of a law company. And so, law would actually arise. It would be handled probably a lot more like in the old English common law system. There would be a lot less legislation. You wouldn't really have Congress saying, okay, such and such is illegal. You would have, a company. So, the basic principle of society would be, hey, if your rights have been violated, hire a company to go and, punish the person who's doing it. And then, so let's say, I'm there, I live in my house and my neighbor comes over and steals something from me. So I accuse him of stealing from me. I hire a police force. He hires a defensive law firm. And then they both together go, well, we have a dispute here. We need somebody to resolve this. So they go hire a third company to adjudicate that dispute, and so the third company acts as the court. They go to court. They have the case and the hearing and everything, and then whatever they come out, that sets the precedent. And then so law would sort of evolve naturally out of those sets of precedences. So I don't know that there would really necessarily even need to be a Congress in an AnCap society. Sorry, go ahead.
We kind of have that now, though, where judges are making rulings on cases, and then that sets precedent. And I don't like that. I don't feel like judges should have that sort of power. But in your system, you would actually capitalize on that sort of power.
Yeah, I think the difference is that, like, now you have the government. What sort of accountability do these judges really have? I mean, it's sort of like an elitist club here, where they've already got their position. Some of them are elected, but a lot of them are appointed. So once they've proved themselves and gotten into the position, especially you look at the Supreme Court, they're there for life. There's no term limit on them, and so there's a lot of that going on. To where there's just not a lot of accountability or to hold them in check, but in our system, that third company you hire to be the court, they have a vested interest in being as fair as possible because they want to have a good reputation, because they want to be hired again as the court. And plus they probably run their own, law firm and police agency or whatever, and they want customers to hire them too. So, I think that there would be a natural sort of, we want to be as fair as possible sort of check on that. And there might be some general encroachment in certain directions, but I don't think it would be as runaway as it is now. Is what I'm saying. Because right now there's just no check on it, and there's nothing you can do. The courts decide something like Obergefell, and what are you going to do about it? You got to play this long game where you try to elect presidents who will appoint judges who. Roe v. We're still trying to get Roe v. Wade overturned, right? And so it's like, what do you do about Roe v. Wade? There's very little that you can actually accomplish to actually check that once something bad has happened. But in an AnCap society, if there's a bad precedent, there's nobody forcing any court to hold to that precedent if it's a bad precedent. And if a company makes a bad precedent, they can go out of business, and the other companies can go, we're not going to abide by that. And there's nobody really forcing them to do that. But everybody has the natural incentive because they need to satisfy their customers to be as fair as possible. And so I think that would generally overrule any sort of bad decisions, or at least that's, again, the theory.
And so would this go into things like police as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So you have a police force, and you have a cop goes and beats somebody or has an unjustified shooting or whatever. That police force, they want to be seen as a fair and just and good police force, because they want neighborhoods to hire them, or they want private citizens to call them up if they need protection or have a dispute or something like that. And so they're gonna discipline this officer and have necessary reason to do that. Plus, if whoever he assaulted is probably going to be accusing him, so they'll have their own. So there'll be another agency involved or whatever, at least two more agencies involved, and so there'll be a natural this government, this police force is not going to be able to investigate themselves. You'll have somebody outside come and investigate them, and it'd be a lot easier to hold them accountable and not sweep things under the rug. And we think really that would be the solution to a lot of the problems that we're seeing. There's the Black Lives Matter people. They try to make it about racism, and I don't think it's necessarily about racism. I think it's just more that government is unchecked, and so there's an us versus them mentality that infects the police just in general. There's bad laws like drug prohibition and everything, where our officers are enforcing things they really have no business enforcing, and so we just have a lot of conflict coming from the police that doesn't need to be. and there's nobody holding them accountable because they investigate themselves. And so, if we had a third party be able to come in and investigate them, but there is no third party right now. And so that's why we're in a situation we're in. And hopefully, in an AnCap society, there would be a check on that.
Well, I wonder how short-sighted that would be, though, because, I mean, we have lots of people who are struggling just to get food right now, and somehow they need government all of a sudden, and now they have to go pay for government to do something, whereas now we just pay our taxes and the government's supposed to do their jobs.
Well, they're paying for it in either way, right?
Right, but are you saying that we're not gonna be paying taxes in this anarcho-capitalist world?
Yeah, who would you pay taxes to?
I don't know. I mean, I keep just in my head, I keep thinking there has to be some sort of like government somewhere, but I suppose you're not saying there is. There's like absolutely nothing anywhere to pay taxes to.
So I would say, who does the United States of America, the country of the United States of America, who do they pay taxes to? Who makes sure that there's a government that keeps Canada and the United States of America and Mexico? Who makes sure that we, as the three countries here, are able to function and live peacefully together? I mean, the United States of America, we relate peacefully with Canada and Mexico all the time. I mean, that's not perfect. We've got our issues with Mexico, apparently. We want to build a wall for some reason. But, it's not perfect. But, we have these international relationships, and there's not one world government. And so I'm saying, why would there need to be a one country government over, Ohio and Kentucky and Georgia? Why can't we have each state be its own government? And then better than that, even, why can't each city have its own government, or each neighborhood, or each street, or each household even have their own government? And we could just find ways to interact peacefully with each other. And that would be the goal, at least.
Okay. So you're saying because they're not paying taxes that they're going to, I guess, have more money in their pockets to where they're able to pay for these other services. So their house burns down. Now they need to call the fire department, and they can call whichever fire department is closest, whichever one is least expensive, whichever one they think is going to do the best job. And they call them over to, to put out the fire on their house, and then they pay them for putting out the fire.
Yeah, there could be any number of arrangements. You could have a prior subscription with with a fire department, if that's kind of the way you want to play it. Maybe you have a fire insurance or whatever, and your fire insurance company has their own fire department. And so if you have an issue, you can call them and they'll dispatch somebody to your area. Or you could play it a little more risky, and you could have you could call somebody up just in the moment and come in. They could come in and put it out, and then you just pay them whatever they ask or whatever, kind of like going to the emergency room. In a truly free market where there's no sort of socialism involved, then the prices would be controlled by competition, by supply and demand, and things like that. And it would not be like free. It wouldn't necessarily be super cheap. I mean, some things are expensive because they necessarily need to be expensive, and they're important, and they genuinely have value. But it would be controlled. It wouldn't be run away like the sorts of anytime the government gets involved in providing things, then the pricing just goes out of control. And the reason why that happens is, you look at policing, if we have a police force and they do a bad job of, being a police force, they don't catch their criminals, they assault people, they're going to lose money. In an AnCap society, because people are going to stop paying them money, they're going to stop hiring them. But in our society, if we have a police force that does a bad job and their statistics are bad or whatever, what do they say? They say, "Oh, we need more money so that we can go fight these bad guys." And so doing a bad job creates this weird backwards incentive to where now they get more money, and so if they want even more money, they do a bad job now, right? Because doing a good job doesn't get you more money. It gets you at the very least, the same amount of money, right? So the incentives are reversed. In an AnCap society, they want more money. They need to do a better job, and they need to be able to compete with the other companies. And so, they'll at least not be too expensive, because then if they're more expensive than the other guy's going to undercut them, and the prices will be at least where we call it equilibrium, where supply and demand and consumer preference and everything will sort of even out. And so, yeah, and so in general, I would say I would sum up the whole idea with you know, a Basquiat quote, and I don't actually have it like right in front of me, so I can't read it word for word. But you know, Basquiat says that socialism confuses the idea of society and government, and says that you know, whenever we object to something being done by government, like schools or you know, he didn't say necessarily all of these because he was in a different time, but you know, education, healthcare, et cetera. You know, people think that we object to it being done at all, but it's just that we think that the market can do it better. And he actually compares it to food. He says it's like if people were to say that we don't want people to eat just because we don't want the government to grow and pass out the grain. Well, no, I mean, we can all look at like Soviet Russia and Venezuela and see what happens when the government socializes and gets involved in actually trying to distribute food. You have empty shelves, you have bread lines and these kinds of things. And so we know that the government doesn't actually do a good job of providing these things that they say they're supposed to be providing. When they tax in order to make sure that it's available, all of a sudden it's not available. And the reason why they do that is because they disable the natural price systems that coordinate the market so that the market can actually get supply to where it needs to be when it needs to be there. And so that gets a little more of the economic side of things. But you know, when you look at economics and you understand how prices work and what they do in society and how all of the different parts of society can respond like almost instantaneously to a fluctuating price, and how, you know, if people are just naturally oriented around that free market and the price system, you know, it's amazing how things can be coordinated to get stuff where it needs to go. But when you have like a central planner who has to say, okay, we need healthcare over here, and we need healthcare over here, and we need healthcare over here, he has to know way more than he could possibly ever know at once in order to be able to get all of the healthcare where it needs to go all the time. And he has to know who's sick and what equipment to send where, and it's just too much information. He can't collect it all at once. He can't process it all at once. And by the time he gets it, it's changed, and he doesn't have the knowledge that he needs to be able to actually effectively distribute healthcare. So even if he's doing the best he can, he's not going to be able to do a good job. Whereas with the price system, if individual actors are all individually, naturally, spontaneously responding to the price system, then it's amazing. Things just, we call it spontaneous order. Things just align. And it's not to say that there's no bad actors, because there is human sin. But generally, you know, the price system and the free market and the profit incentive sort of gives people a way to seek their own self-interest in a way that actually serves others. And so you have maybe less of a propensity for that. Anyway, so
what's the difference between this and laissez-faire capitalism?
Well, we would say it sort of is laissez-faire capitalism. Now, probably what you're referring to with laissez-faire capitalism is probably, or at least the term, the people who have used the term would probably be more Republican, Tea Party mindset or whatever. And so a lot of them, or at least the people who used to use that term, would be a little more in the statist framework. There would just be like Republicans who would be like, you know, we need a state to provide things like, you know, the police and national defense and everything, but we don't want no regulations on business, so business can go do whatever they want. We're not going to tell them what to do or whatever, but we still need to have a nationalized, you know, the main things that people have always sort of said need to be nationalized. There's defense, policing, courts, you know, those kinds of things. So they would still say there needs to be a monopoly for those things, but anything else, you know, anything goes. And so that's kind of typically what your like old guard Republican, kind of Reagan Republican idea is, at least. And we would say, well, no, why can't we have, you know, if we think, you know, a free market can provide healthcare and food and everything, and cars, why can't they provide police too? Anyway, that's our take.
So what about regulation? Do we believe that all regulation is bad, or is there some sort of, are there going to be firms that we're going to pay to regulate us as well?
I think some places will definitely have a vested interest in seeking regulation. Like, and I would put it this way, like, you know, let's say I'm a factory and I'm making, I don't know, some chainsaw or something like that. I don't know. And I think that I can sell more chainsaws if I can get some third party to come in and test my chainsaws and make sure that they're safe. and put their sticker on my chainsaw or whatever. Or a car, let's say, a lot of cars, they'll market themselves as having 5-star crash tests and everything like that. And the government usually the government usually does these, and they impose them on people. And, so it's not voluntary, but it's still a marketing tool. The companies that do well at those, they go out and they're like, hey, we passed the crash test rating with 5 stars, and that it allows them to sell more cars. And so I think that would still naturally be a thing that people would, or companies at least, that are trying to put products out there would still have a vested interest in doing, because then it could tell people and signal to people, hey, we do a good job with our cars, we do a good job with our safety and everything. And so, yeah, you want to buy ours, you don't want to buy that guy's. He doesn't have a sticker on his. We got a sticker on ours.
Yeah, I don't think it's that simple though. I mean, especially when it comes to regulation. I did construction, and I knew people who would have, if they could have done anything to get away with stuff, to spend less money. Like I think I talked about this actually once in a group that we're in together, the Church and State, where there was in the early 21st century, 20th century, we had a monopoly, or at least like a deal with all of the light bulb companies, where they were all together saying, we are going to make our light bulbs where they have a very short lifespan on them. And as long as all of us do this, then we can all make more money. And so they would make light bulbs that lasted a couple months up to a year. Now, up till that point, light bulbs pretty much lasted forever. There are still light bulbs that are still shining bright from the 1800s right now. But once this happened, now they put this set this cap on the lifespan of light bulbs, so that people had to continuously buy light bulbs. And because they were only lasting a couple months, eventually the government put a regulation on light bulbs to make sure that they had to last a certain amount of time. They couldn't just poop out 10 minutes after you got home, and then you have to go buy another thing. And as long as all of the light bulb companies together are in on the deal, then it's okay. And you might say, okay, well, but then anybody can just come up with this brand new light bulb company, and then they're going to be getting all the customers because everybody knows that their light bulbs last real long. But then in reality, these big light bulb companies just come and buy that guy out, and now he's gone, and now all of the light bulbs again are crap. Is that their right? Is that their right to have all of their light bulbs be crappy, or is there a way to regulate this, or what is the option in a scenario like that?
So I would say, I don't think that that's sustainable in the long term, because it just takes one of those companies to be big enough and belligerent enough to not go along with it. If like GE and Philips and everybody's all in on this racket at the beginning, but then one of them says, no, we're not going to abide by this. Then, I mean, what's the likelihood that if they dig their heels in and say we're not going to be bought out because we have enough capital and we have enough knowledge and understanding that this is actually going to get us the business, and eventually I think that problem could self-correct.
But in almost 200 years, though, in almost 200 years, nobody has done that. Nobody has come along. None of the big light bulb companies have gone astray. They are all on course to continue making light bulbs that will last a year, maybe 2 years, but they're not lasting longer than that. Like, they are all very sure that they are, because this is the most profitable way. If one of them veers off, sure, maybe they get all the customers, but their light bulbs are lasting longer now, and so those customers aren't coming back as often because their light bulbs last longer.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, you've got CFL bulbs and LED bulbs are coming out now, and those are lasting longer. Although it is kind of funny because my LEDs don't seem to last as long as I would love them to. But yeah. I would go back a little further on that though, and say, I don't know. I would question at what point do we think that we're somehow entitled to a light bulb that lasts a certain length?
Yeah, sure.
I mean, we certainly want it to be, convenient for us and cheap for us and everything. But, the idea, having electricity, that's a luxury, that if we can afford that, then it's great for us to afford and to be able to have and everything. So, I mean, I don't know that there's necessarily, I mean, yeah, it seems like a pretty crummy way for them to act. And it seems like, these greedy people, they're getting away with making more money at the expense of people. But, at the same time, I would say, on what grounds do we have to say, we have to force them to do things a certain way? I don't think that we necessarily have that right. I mean, it's unfortunate. I mean, we would certainly rather things to be another way, but, I would also say, what is the trade-off? Because, if the companies, they're making these, light bulbs that only last like, 2 months or something like that before they have to be replaced, how much material goes into that? What's their trade-off there, between, are they able to sell, for example, like if it's $1 for a light bulb that lasts 2 months, and they could make a light bulb that lasts a year, but is that like a $20 light bulb? I mean, I don't really know. So, I mean, you have to sort of weigh the costs and the benefits of that. And, the company that stands to make the profit or loss, they're actually in the best position to be able to evaluate that. And, it does seem kind of crummy that they would have some sort of this, agreement between themselves. But I think if it was really, truly going to be better and more profitable for them to do it another way, I think somebody would break ranks. And so, yeah, I don't know.
It's not just one thing, though. I mean, there's numerous companies who are doing this. And I would agree with you up until the point where they are all in cahoots to make sure that the consumers cannot get a good product. And so if you look at like cable companies, cable and phone companies have all gotten, they're all in cahoots to zone out where they're allowed to have service. And so like me, I can only get Comcast. There is no AT&T. I walk about 2 miles down the road, there's AT&T there, but Comcast doesn't go there. And you stop having these options because they have made deals with each other that we are not going to encroach on each other's territories so that we can make sure we monopolize that area alone. Only I can run wires in this area code. Only you can run wires in this area code. And then we each make sure that we're not actually in competition with each other.
Yeah, so what the real mechanism actually behind that is actually the regulations itself. So you look at like healthcare as like the classic recent example of where, Obama gets in office and he promises this universal healthcare or whatever, but then what he actually delivers is a healthcare bill written by the healthcare companies, written by the insurance industry, and this is why government isn't going to be the solution, or at least a democracy is not going to be the solution, because you have the lobbyists and the special interests who are able to get in there and they're able to control things. And so I was seeing something the other day about Google was wanting to what was it? They wanted to regulate AI. They're calling for regulations on AI, and I'm like, who else is in the AI game? Oh, anybody who might in the future compete with Google. They're wanting to get their foot in the door. They want to go ahead and write the regulations so that anybody else who wants to try to play the game, they have to play it the way that Google wants to play them. And that's usually what ends up happening is you end up having the big companies, the vested interests, all these people who are in business, in league with each other, they're the ones who go and they write the regulations. And then those regulations end up favoring the big established interests. And so it gets really, really impossible for somebody to come into the business and compete with them. You take the light bulb example. If 5 companies are sitting there going, okay, we all agree we're going to make light bulbs this way, and somebody else goes, hey, we can beat them if we don't play that game. We're going to start up our own light bulb company. And you said, well, what if one of the big company goes and buys them out? Well, that has to be a voluntary transaction, unless there's some like way of using the government to coerce them into allowing them to be bought out. Which I don't think there should be a government that's able to do that. Then the company can always decide to dig their heels in and go, we're not going to sell. And so there's always a potential, at least, that whether or not they would succeed, who knows? I mean, it would be a risk. But if it's really that big of a racket that's going on, I think that they would succeed. And so, as long as they have the courage to stick it out and turn down the big dollar sign number that's sitting right in their front of their face in order for to look at the long-term gain and the good that they're doing for society, I think it's possible that kind of thing could happen.
I think my issue, though, is that everything in your anarcho-capitalist system, it all depends on this competition happening between everybody, and that all of these companies want what's best for the consumer because that's what's best for the company. But when we look at these companies that are not being regulated correctly, we can see that that's not what actually happens. They all band together and they say, hey, we can make the crappy products. There's nothing they can do about it as long as we all hold tight. And we obviously, the other companies are not coming out and competing with them because it's just not in their best interest. And according to you, what's in everybody's best interest is what makes them the most money. So what makes me the most money is for me to sell my company to the big light bulb companies or to the big cable companies so that they can take me over.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, if they may decide, though, that, right now, like in the next 2 months, that what's going to make me the most money is to take the deal. But they could always, Howie Mandel, that Deal or No Deal show, they could always be like, no deal, I'm staying pat, because they could look at the long run. Now that's a much riskier and a much longer prospect. But if they decide, hey, we've crunched the numbers and we're making this many sales, and if we get the word out, we're going to stick with it, and we think we can make more than that in the long term, then yeah, I mean, there's always a possibility that they could stick it out.
Yeah, I mean, there's a possibility. I
mean, nothing's perfect.
Yeah,
I don't think anarcho-capitalism. I'm not trying to present anarcho-capitalism as a utopia. Obviously, things are not going to be perfect. There's always going to be some sort of barrier to entry to starting any sort of business. You have to accumulate at least a certain amount of capital to be able to just get started, and that's not anybody enforcing anything on anybody. It's just the nature of it takes investment to be able to buy the initial capital that you need to start a factory or something like that. You gotta have some money. So there's always going to be some sort of barrier to entry. You're always going to have a delayed period of getting going and everything before you can even start turning a profit and stuff like that. And there's always going to be risks involved. And nothing's going to be perfect. The established interests are always going to have some sort of advantage. And if they want to try to collude with each other, maybe not, they could. But I mean, I would say the only way to guarantee that they can survive and get away with collusion or something like that is if they can codify it into a government that has a coercive authority to be able to say, oh no, it has to be this way because this is what the law says. If they can codify their collusion into law, which is usually what they do through regulation. And so you talk about companies that aren't properly regulated, and I would say the reason they're not properly regulated is because they wrote the regulations. They wanted to be able to get away with this, and so they codified it into law. And now, now you legally have to play ball with them. And so you're really stuck now. And so regulation isn't necessarily the solution to that because it plays right into their hands. And so if we take that away, are they still going to be able to try to do this? Maybe. But, I mean, it takes a weapon out of their arsenal is my angle on it, at least.
Yeah, sometimes. I mean, being fiscally conservative, I don't want a lot of regulation. That's just more of my tax dollars going to the government. But when I really think about it, there doesn't seem to be a whole lot I can do about it. I mean, when it comes down to it, the last thing in the world I want is all these house building construction companies colluding together to say, hey, let's all just build crappy houses and buildings from now on. And then now people will fall through their freaking floors. Who cares? There's nothing they can do about it as long as we all hold tight and stick together.
Well, I still think that there would be this idea of like consumer products liability. I mean, like tort law, I think would still be a thing in an AnCap society. So if a company like a chainsaw company or whatever makes a truly genuinely unsafe product, and I'm not talking about somebody being an idiot and putting it through their leg because they're dumb, but I'm talking like something that genuinely malfunctions and doesn't work or whatever. I think you should still be able to sue them because if you put something into the stream of commerce, you're sort of responsible for how it's for it to actually function within a reasonable framework of a way of doing that. And so I think if people are building houses and they're so unsafe that everybody's falling through their floors and everything because of shoddy workmanship, I think you'd still be able to sue the company and get some sort of a payment for that. Damages or something like that to be awarded to you. So I still think that would be a function in society. It just wouldn't be like a proactive sort of. So I'm against this whole idea of proactive legislation, proactive regulation, because we don't necessarily know like what the unintended consequences of these things are. And so we go out and we think, such and such of a regulation sounds like a good idea, but we don't really know what it's going to do to the economy or who it's going to hurt. Like, take gun control, for example. Got people shooting people and everything. And so everybody's got these feelings that guns are dangerous and we need to do something about guns. And I totally sympathize with their feelings, but they're not thinking about the unintended consequences that if you take guns away from good people, all of a sudden the bad people are going to have guns and nobody's going to be able to defend themselves. And so it's that sort of effect happens anytime you regulate anything, anytime you legislate anything. There's always going to be some sort of trade-off there between hurting good people in the name of trying to stop bad people. And so I want as little proactive regulation and proactive legislation as possible. And I think if there's common law sort of free market courts where everybody, at least the natural incentive of making a profit, says, we want to be able to be as fair as possible, then you would have generally this, you'd be able to get some sort of judgment and discipline and damages or something for that, and then companies would learn, we shouldn't do that because we could get sued, and so then hopefully they would sort of naturally stay away from that. And they do it the first time, they're going to do it till they get away with it, maybe. But then once they get sued, hopefully that should put a stop to it. Whatever. People often bring up that fire. There was a fire in a textile factory in New York or whatever back in like the 1890s or something like that, where all the people who worked there died because they didn't have proper escapes. They didn't have fire escapes. They didn't have fire extinguishers and stuff like that. People often bring that up, and they're like, well, they needed the government to regulate that and the government to keep that from happening. And it's it's one of those things where we have to be careful that we're not like unsympathetic to the realities of the human suffering involved. I mean, we definitely have to be compassionate about that. That was a tragedy, and we wish it definitely was preventable, and we wish it had been prevented. But we also have to say, the government actually didn't do anything to prevent that. They can't ever really prevent it the first time it happens, unless they go out there and have all this draconian legislation where it's like, don't do anything without explicit permission. And unless you take that sort of level of command and control of the entire economy, and even then, they just don't know everything. And so, there's always going to be a little bit of, well, after the fact, okay, now we're going to regulate this. But I think that would have self-regulated, honestly. That the people who owned that factory, they lost their factory. And so they're going to be like, oh, next time I have a factory, I don't want to lose my factory. And so I'm going to build this. Or other companies who have factories will go, oh, I don't want to lose my factory to a fire, so I'm going to build fire suppressant in, and I'm going to whatever. So that doesn't happen to me. Or if they get sued and they have to pay damages, and other companies will be like, well, I don't want that, so I'm gonna whatever. So I think there could always be a little after the fact sort of, well, we've learned some lessons from this because we don't want this to happen to us and this and everything, and so we're going to adjust and naturally do things in a better way. And I think that would happen. I don't know.
Okay. Yeah,
that's just my view. Again, I have to be clear. I don't think anything's perfect. There is human sin, and there is human fallibility. I just don't think the government is immune to that. The government's not immune to human sin. They're not immune to human fallibility, and I think they have natural limitations. They have the knowledge problem. They have the calculation problem, to where their ability to do a good job at these things is hindered. And so, even if they're the most noble people, they can do some good, but ultimately I don't think they can do as much good as they want to. And I think they generally do more harm than they do good. And so even if, they could say, don't build a house where somebody falls to the floor, I think there's going to be some other unseen, unintended consequence where things actually end up worse off, because that's usually what happens when you have government sort of regulating things. They try to go in and make something better, and they usually end up making it worse.
Oh yeah, I mean, I completely agree with that. I'm rarely happy when the government gets more power and are doing more things. It's not ideal to me at all. But I remember like thinking when I was a kid, like, you know what? I didn't agree to live in this country. Like, how is it that they're gonna
Yeah,
arrest
right.
me? I never said that they could arrest me. I never agreed to their
Right.
rules.
I never signed the social contract.
Yeah, like, yeah, I remember thinking this stuff, but then I guess eventually I just thought, like, you know what, it's not. Let's see, what, there's a saying. I think it's like the democracy is the worst thing out there except for everything else.
Yeah,
And
I've heard that.
yes, and so I kind of think that of government overall. Like, government is the worst thing out there. There is nothing worse than the government except for every other option. Like, it is just, it's never going to be perfect. It's always going to suck, but it is what it is, and it's just as good as it's going to get.
Yeah, I would suggest reading Democracy, the God That Failed by Hans Hermann Hoppe. It's a really good and really in-depth look at the economic incentives of government officials, in a sense. So it uses this concept of public choice theory, which is that, government officials, elected ones, appointed ones, or whatever, they still make economic decisions in how they operate within their offices and everything. So when you can apply the same sort of economic analysis that you would apply to anybody else for, why would I buy one thing over another? It would be because I'm going to buy the one that maximizes my happiness or my wealth or improves my life the most or whatever. You apply that same sort of theory to government officials, and you look at the sort of incentives that they have in their government positions and everything. It's a very interesting analysis. So he actually comes down and actually takes a position that monarchy is actually better than democracy from the standpoint of a president or somebody in office who has like a term limit. He has like a certain amount of time that he can maximize his own benefit out of being in office, and then he's gone. And he just hands it over to somebody else, and he doesn't have to suffer any sort of consequence. There's no vested interest in him actually making things better there, because he's just going to be gone after that. So he can make things better for himself in a long, take as much away from it as he can in that amount of time, but he doesn't have to worry about leaving any value, positive value behind. Whereas a king, at least, there have been bad kings, so this monarchy is not perfect, but, a king at least has some sort of interest in, because he is going to reign for his entire life. So he wants to maximize, the value of his kingdom and his government and everything for his lifetime. But also he's going to pass it on to his son. So he wants to leave as much of a valuable and profitable and healthy, peaceful country to his son as he can too. And so there's sort of an idea.
Sorry, that makes so much sense. There was that poll in that group where people were asking, which would you rather, a president, a monarchy, and I could not believe how many people picked the king. And I guess there is a huge AnCap community. Yes, there's a huge AnCap community in there, though. And
was that the church and state group?
Yes, it was. And I was very surprised that they all chose monarchy. And I guess that's the idea behind it, but that also kind of combats your issue with Supreme Court not having term limits on them. I mean, the king has absolutely no term limit to him, and so maybe he really doesn't have any interest at all.
Yeah, Hoppe goes on from there, and he criticizes the king as well, and he winds up into the position of anarcho-capitalism in the end. So it's a good read. I would suggest picking it up, just to be challenged or whatever, to think about following the logic that he uses. I'm sure you can find reason to disagree with it or not, but it's just a good read. So I just throw that out there.
Yeah. Yeah, I have an aversion to reading. I really do. Like,
our society really does this to us. We have so many movies and so many Netflix shows and so many Facebook apps or Facebook conversations and so many memes and so many phone apps that finding time to read really requires serious discipline. And I struggle with it. I'll be honest. It is hard to find time to read because I am just so often just drawn towards, oh, hey, I'm still behind on The Walking Dead, or, whatever. This new Netflix show. I mean, Formula One Drive to Survive comes out next month, and I'm looking forward to that. It's just, there's so much just mindless entertainment we can consume, and it's so easy to do, and it's such sugar, and it's hard to get off of that, man. I tell you what, it's a struggle for me.
Yeah, most of my stuff is like I want to listen to podcasts, and I learn everything while I'm working or while I'm driving or while I'm doing whatever. I'm listening to some podcast, learning about socialism or communism or whatever. Like I like to learn stuff, but I don't like to read. I don't want to just sit and read.
Yeah. You ever listen to the Tom Woods show?
No, I haven't.
He's an AnCap guy, and he's not a Christian, so take that with a grain of salt. But I mean, I should back up. He's a Catholic, but I don't know how much I can't comment on how devout he is as a Catholic. He doesn't necessarily use religion in his reasoning for his political theory is what I'm saying. So his political theory is a religious, and I think that's a problem because I'm a sufficiency of scripture guy. I'm a biblical worldview guy. I'm a presuppositionalist, and so I think the biblical worldview is the true worldview, and everything should be grounded in scripture. Scriptures are sola scriptura. Scriptures are highest authority, and I think everything should accord with scripture, and we should be reasoning from scripture. And so I try very hard to reason my political theory from scripture, and so Tom Woods is not, but he's very well knowledgeable about all of the economic arguments and all of the theories of Rothbard and everything. He's better at that stuff than I am, and so he'd be a good one to listen to if you're ever curious on going more into that.
Yeah, I think I don't ever believe in legislating my religion, but my axioms and my presuppositions, they all start with me believing that there is a God and that he handed me a book that tells me everything I need to know. And when I start with that, that's where I believe I get all of my rights from. I get all of my rights from God, and so therefore most everything I believe, it starts with this idea that I have God-given rights. And this is where I normally clash with progressives, because progressives don't really care about
hardcore rejecting God. They are hardcore on rejecting God.
It's not even just God. It's that they don't believe that there's any such thing as rights. Rights are only whatever the government says they are. If a government says you have this right, then sure, you have this right. But a government can't infringe on your rights. A government cannot violate your rights because they decide whether or not it's a right or not in the first place. And so
they have this idea of they have this idea of positive rights too. You have this positive right to have health care, or you have this positive right to have, whatever, a job or a living wage or whatever it is. And and it's no, you have a negative right. You have negative rights. Your negative rights are that your life, liberty, and property may not be taken away. Now, within that, you have great opportunity to go and provide for yourself health care and provide for yourself housing and all these other things. But to say you have a right to have these things, whether you can afford them, whether you work for them, whether you earn them or not, it's ridiculous. And that's where, in order to have those positive rights, you have to violate somebody's negative rights. And so like Rand Paul was saying to Bernie Sanders at one point in a Senate thing or whatever, he basically straight up told him, he says, universal health care is slavery, because if I'm a doctor and you're telling me that somebody has a right to health care and I'm at home with my family and that person needs health care, if they have a right to health care, it would be criminal of me to not take care of them. And so I'm a slave now, in a sense. Now, it's obviously not as simplistic as that, because there's more doctors than just one, but when it boils down to that, yeah, all of these positive rights, they require violating somebody's negative rights. They require stealing, they require enslaving, and yeah, it's a whole big mess. I think we agree on most of those things.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, definitely when it comes to what rights are, and we're probably going to be on the same page. It's just I do have this thought in the back of my head that maybe like socialism, if it was done right, really could help a lot of people. It's just a matter of whether or not that's violating my rights. And so now I start to wonder, like, well, Jesus did care about feeding the sick and feeding the poor, but then at the same time, it's like, if everybody really cared about this stuff on the left as much as the people do on the right, maybe we wouldn't have these problems because they'd be donating to charities just as much as
Bernie
we do.
wouldn't have 4 houses if he really cared about the poor.
I wouldn't say that. I mean, look, you can indulge at the same time as helping others, but I just mean that if they gave to charity half as much as people on the right do, then it would actually be a huge help, and maybe we could make a lot of change. But instead, they're like, no, we need to make sure that somebody is forcing us to do it in the government. That way we can make sure that we pay it, we give our money to charity. And to me, that's just not the way it should work. It should be a choice, and you should want to help the poor, and you should want to help the sick, and you should want to help these people. It's just more of how you do it and whether or not you're being forced to do it.
Yeah, my perspective is, I'm responsible for what God has given me first, and that's my family. And if them telling me that I need to take care of some poor people over in another country, or not another country, but another city or another part of the country or something like that, and so they start taking my tax money and everything, so I am not as well able to take care of my family. Then I have a big problem with that, because I think God has put me and my family to take care of my family, and I don't want anybody taken from them. And so it's not necessarily selfish of me that I don't want socialism or anything like that necessarily. It's because I care about the people that I want to help. And I don't think the government has the right to tell me who I can help. I think I have the right to decide who I'm going to help. And, if it's not going to be my direct family, it's going to be my local church. I want my local church to get as much help as I can. If I've got extra money so that the government can take thousands of my dollars to go provide health care for people, I'd rather put that thousands of dollars towards somebody in my church who needs to find a job or something like that, And so, yeah, I definitely think that the government overreaching into those kinds of things is immoral, and it's evil. And you're talking about, if socialism could work, it's never going to work because of the calculation problem and the knowledge problem. It's never going to work. It's why it's always failed. And
but we're talking about more on a theoretical basis. Say socialism could work. Say that we could make it work.
Yeah.
What do you think that this is a violation of your rights anyways?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I struggle with that one because I'm back and forth on it. I'm wondering, well, if it really does help people, shouldn't we as Christians want, if it is really the best way to help everybody and the most people all at once, isn't that what we should want as Christians? But then I'm back to, but then they're forcing me to do something with my own private property that they really shouldn't be doing. But it's more, then I wonder, well, what am I prioritizing here? Am I prioritizing my own money and my own cash over the well-being of everybody else? And I just don't know. I'm back and forth on that one all the time.
So think of it this way. Don't think about yourself being the one who's being taxed. Think about your neighbor. Right? Mm-hmm. You're saying, do I steal from my neighbor to provide for those people, or do I not steal from my neighbor to provide for those people? And that changes the calculus, right? Because it's not just you that's being taxed. Everybody's being taxed, right? And so I say, if it's up to me, whatever, if they're asking me for a donation or if they're just taxing me, maybe I'll say, okay, whatever. But if they're taxing everybody, that's my neighbor, and if I'm voting for a tax or something like that, I'm stealing from my neighbor, in a sense. And I think we have to be very careful of the utilitarian reasoning there, because I heard a little bit of that, and it's definitely what the left uses and everything, and it's like it's hard to think against. So this is like the Aristotelian idea that happiness is the greatest good, and what makes most people happy is good, so then we can justify or let's take Spock, right? Everybody knows Spock's famous line, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one. It sounds so good, right? Because we want to help as many people as we can. But then, take this example though, right? Let's say you've got 5 people in a hospital room. And 4 of them are like on death's door because they each need an organ transplant. Like one of them needs a heart, one of them needs a liver, one of them needs a kidney, one of them needs a lung or something like that.
Yes, I know this one.
And the other guy, the 5th guy, is fine. But yeah, the other guy, his 5th guy is fine, but he's got a lung and a kidney and a heart and a liver. And so do you kill the guy and take his organs to give to the other people? Well,
yes,
no,
because you're saving 5 over one person. Yeah.
Right. So the math of it works out that more people are better off, but you still killed this one guy. And so I think that's why we have to be like, first and foremost, we have to be a priori and biblical in our reasoning and say, the reason why it right is because God created man in his own image. And so when we violate anybody's individual rights, we're effectively assaulting the image of God. And we're in a sense, we're taking up arms against God himself. So we ought to be very, very careful about doing that. I think it's very virtuous for somebody to volunteer for something, but to be coerced into doing it, I think is absolutely evil. Even if we can try to justify it with, maximizing the benefit for everybody else.
But, okay, so 2 things. One, the trolley, you can also use the trolley experiment for that as well, where you have one guy on one track and 5 guys on the other track, right where the track is about to split off for the trolley. And you have to make a decision. You're heading right towards 5 guys, and you have to make a decision. Do I pull the lever and so that we switch tracks just to kill the one guy? Or do I just say I have to leave this in God's hands and just let them run over the other 5 guys? You want to try to steer the trolley towards the one guy so that you save 5 guys. And it's the same exact exercise with the body organs, except in the body organs, that's you that you're talking about. But it's a similar exercise. Just pulling this lever on the trolley means that you're now hopefully saving more people instead of it seems to be the same
it's
thing.
a classic conundrum. It's a classic conundrum. And I would say about that situation is I would say, I mean, unless you're the one who set up the situation, unless you tied the people to the tracks and sent the trolley car down or whatever, you're not morally responsible for what happens unless you take action. I mean, you come upon the scene and you see what's going on. You're not really, I don't think you're morally responsible for what happens unless you take action.
But isn't indecision a decision by itself?
I don't think you can necessarily say that. Because sometimes you just don't have time to react. In our hypothetical, we can set it up any way we want. We can say you have time to react, right? So
yes.
I don't know. But yeah, it's hard to say. I don't know what I would do in that situation. I'll be honest. But I think it's a little different than the other situation. Because again, I mean, these 5 people, they were put there unnaturally. Whereas, the people in the hospital room, they're sick or whatever, and they're going to die. And, and there's time to get them other organ transplants or whatever. And so, yeah, I think I would err on the side of it would be wrong to switch the train, because then you're actively killing somebody versus, allowing other people to die. But I say that with much reservation, saying, I don't know what would be the right call on that one. So I'll just be honest about that. I think I err towards the side of don't switch the track, but I really don't know. I mean, it's hard. I think it's a hard philosophical problem on purpose.
I think not switching the track and letting it hit the 5 guys is a decision that you're making. If you have time to react and you understand the situation, you understand that you have this option, choosing not to do it is also choosing to kill the 5 guys. It is the same decision.
Right. But I don't think it's quite the same. I don't think it's as much a decision as it would be to send it down the other cul.
Yes, but you're saying that just because you're not responsible for this situation doesn't mean that overall, like, I guess God wouldn't hold you responsible for it, because if I guess if you're put in the situations by God to help people, you would hope that you make the right decision in those situations.
Yeah. I would pray for superpowers and jump in front of the train. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay,
I would say,
go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. No, go ahead. I was going to say, as it is on the current train, if it stays as it is, then it will kill those 5 people because somebody else tied them to a train track where a train was coming. And I could have switched the car, but I chose not to. But it's really because that other person tied them to the track. If this other one, if it goes down the 1 and kills that other guy, it's because I sent the train at him. So in the 5, it's because somebody else sent the train at him. And this other one, if it kills the 1, it's because I sent the train at him. And I think for me, that makes enough of a difference. It's like a hair's breadth of a difference. But I think it makes enough of a difference to where the moral responsibility that I bear for the deaths of the 5 would actually be less than the death of the other. But I don't know.
Yeah, I guess I would compare this to the Good Samaritan, in that we have responsibility for each other, in that I would have to make that decision to kill the 1 over the 5 just because it's still my responsibility whether I did it or not. It's still my moral responsibility to make a decision in that situation.
Yeah. And if I found somebody in that situation and they made that decision, I wouldn't be like, you murderer or anything like that. I mean, because that's a really tough call. And I think in that kind of a situation, you got to make the best of the bad options, and switching the track to kill 1 and save 5. It's a bad, you don't have any good options in that situation. And so, it's a contrived hypothetical on purpose. And so I don't think there's a right call, and I don't think there's a wrong call. I think they're both bad, and I don't know what you do, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
So that was the first one. Okay. The second thing is that you talked about whether or not I think I should force my neighbor to I guess to pay for my stuff, which I would flip it the other way.
Or even somebody else's.
Yeah, I would flip it the other way though and say, well, if my neighbor is sick and says, man, I can't afford health care, I really need this to go through, as his neighbor, maybe I should vote for government health care. Maybe I need to now to help my neighbor.
Yeah, well, I think there's a difference between, being willing to help your neighbor yourself versus forcing other people to do it. Because there's still always
God said, or the Bible says though, that you should do these things though. Like you keep saying it like it's not my responsibility unless I choose for it to be my responsibility. But I feel like as Christians, it is always our responsibility.
I don't think there's necessarily a direct responsibility in every particular case to do any particular thing. I think we ought to love others, and we ought to be generous with them with what we have. But I think we have to make judgment calls as far as like how much we are actually able to help. Like again, we have to have a sort of priority where we would help our family first, local church, maybe your direct neighbors or whatever. And so I think within that, there is some moral responsibility to be out there and proactively helping people. But I think helping him is not the same thing as coercing other people to help him. I think other people have other people to help. And so if I go out there and I vote for healthcare, I'm voting for an entire society to be taxed in order to help this one guy. To help other people too. But but the idea being, yeah, the idea being, I want, I don't want it just me to help him. I want to coerce, the guy over there on the other side of the state. I want him to help him too. He doesn't even know him. He has his own family to take care of, but I want to make sure I get his money. And particularly they want to go after the rich too, usually, right? It's just like these billionaires that we think are, hoarding all this wealth, which is a backwards idea anyway. But,
right.
So I think, the way I see it, you look at Acts, the first few chapters of Acts, and you have where like they were like selling their property and they were giving it to the church to help the people in the need. And this is an amazing and great thing that they were doing. And you look at that, and I look at the American church, and I'm like, man, this puts us to shame because we are so blessed in this society with such a high standard of living that we don't have to do that. And so we get in a situation where it's like, man, am I selling all my stuff to follow Jesus? Like the rich young ruler or whatever. I mean, am I giving to the poor and selling to? It's like, sometimes it's hard to. Sometimes that's convicting. That maybe we should be doing more. But I think the key though is that everybody in that situation was doing that voluntarily. There was no coercion involved. Nobody was being forced to do that. They were all doing it voluntarily. And you get to the story of Ananias and Sapphira, and they came in and they sold their land and they kept a portion of it for themselves. But it's interesting to note what Peter says to Ananias is he says, while it was yours, it remained yours, and you could have done whatever you wanted with it. In other words, he was saying nobody was requiring you to give it to us. Right. You could have done whatever you wanted to us. And the issue wasn't that he kept some of it back. The issue was that he lied about it. Right. And so the lie was the problem, not the fact that he didn't give all that he had. And so I think the principle I take away from that is that voluntary charity, voluntary, social activism and everything like that, where we take care of the poor and everything voluntarily, that is something Christians should be doing. And that is something that everybody really should be doing. But Christians should be taking the lead in that, but it's not supposed to be coerced. And I honestly think that, government programs, welfare programs, Medicare, all this healthcare programs have actually neutered the church's ability, opportunity, willingness, call, and urgency for us to do this. I think we're not doing it. We're not taking care of widows and orphans because the government's doing it. And so I think that's actually a very terrible thing. I wish we were doing this, because if we were doing this, then it would give glory to God that the church, his body, is doing this charitable thing. And I think that people, worldly people are going to hate God no matter what, but I think it would be a glorious thing that people would look at and go, wow, it's those, let your light shine before men so that they would see your good works and glorify the Father. You know what I mean? It's that kind of an idea. And I think we're robbed of an opportunity for that because of all that the government does and all its welfare stuff.
Yeah, I think that if at some point we look at the world that we live in objectively and pragmatically and say, look, obviously the churches are losing their power, and what we want the world to be and how we want the churches to take care of the people, that's not going to happen. At some point, we just have to realize it's not going to happen. It's not going back the way we had it before. We need to now move forward with a new idea. And so if we can look at these other ideas and say, look, that actually is the best way to help these people, then instead of looking at it as I'm making the decision to force everybody else to do this, instead I can look at it and just say, I'm looking at this as this is my vote to choose what I want to do with it, and that's how I'm going to vote.
Yeah, we gotta make decisions that are less than ideal in our society. Things are the way they are. We have this government, we have the society, and everything. I just don't think going along with like government health care is necessarily the way to go. I think, the more we can vote against that and allow the market to work, the market would generally bring down prices and improve the availability of good quality service and everything. And I still think that's generally the way to go, just in general, on that. But another option is, we have this sort of insurgency of like a mutual aid society thing coming around. So mutual aid societies were around back in like the early 1900s, and then a lot of regulation came in to like kill them all. But they're sort of coming around again now. and they're able to get away with it because they're like faith-based. So I'm thinking like Samaritan Ministries is one example that comes to mind, and I'm actually a Samaritan member, and it's like the un-healthcare. It's the un-medical insurance. So rather than having medical insurance, you actually pay it, you don't even pay into. You actually are a member of this organization, and every month, instead of sending you like your premium bill, they send you the name of another member in the organization who has a need. And you're asked to send them, there's a specific minimum you have to in order to maintain your membership, but you can send as much as you want if you want to. And you're asked to send them, your money directly to that person. So it's to somebody who has, fallen and broken their leg, or they've had a sickness or something like that, had to go to the doctor and get some care. And maybe for whatever reason, they can't have health insurance and everything. And so you actually send your money directly to them. And then they, get directed the benefit of, you can send them a card, you can send them a word of encouragement, scripture, or something like that. And really, we've actually had several times where we've used it and have had people send us stuff, and it's actually a huge blessing to know that people are praying for you and helping you out, and to have it's amazing. It's like the way the church is supposed to work. It's that a little bit of that picture of Acts 2 and everything, and then so yeah, I think that kind of a thing is the kind of thing that we should be trying to, as much as possible, trying to create, at least within the church. As much as we can. Let's take care of our own, and let's create this alternative way of doing it. It was like, for a while there, you could like get out of the Obamacare mandate if you were in one of these organizations or whatever. And so we did that, actually. I actually had the availability through my job. They offered me health insurance, but the premiums were so high that it was cheaper to go with this.
Yeah.
Pardon me, cough there. Yeah, the premiums were so high, it was actually cheaper to go with this. And so we were like, yeah, let's do this. And so, yeah, we've been doing this we've been Samaritan Ministries members for years. And I think the more those kinds of things can rise up, right now the law is against us for doing that, like in a broader sense. You have to be a member of this sort of faith-based organization, and Samaritan Ministries has a statement of faith you have to agree to, and you have to abide by certain moral principles and everything. So it would be hard for somebody who's not a believer to be in the organization. But I think the more we can rise up and have those kinds of things exist, and it shines a light, honestly, to how much better things can be. So
yeah, I agree. Yeah, there's lots of cool companies out there, but go ahead.
Well, hey, it's been fun. I should probably get running at some point. This has been a great conversation. Thanks for having me on, and I just totally took me by surprise, but I've really enjoyed kind of the back and forth that we've had. I think this has been a good discussion. So I'd love to do it again sometime.
Yeah, I was gonna say Kat didn't make it on. She was supposed to jump on, so I'll get with you and maybe we can do it again next week. But I appreciate you coming on. Yeah, it was really good. And if you want to, man, share the video with whoever you want. It'll be up on YouTube as well, and it's on the Facebook page. So I appreciate it, man.
Cool. Yeah,
all
thanks,
right,
man.
later, Mike. All right, see you. And for everybody else, I'm hopping off too. If you want to see more, go to tomfoolerypc.com. It's tomfoolerypc.com. You can get all the great content in one place, and you can even just listen to the podcast if you'd like to. All episodes available now, and it's all on tomfoolerypc.com. All right. We'll see you next week for streaming Saturdays on Tomfoolery.